Hello, my name's Audra. They told everyone I walked away from the family, that I left Charleston years ago and never looked back. But what if I told you that wasn't true? That while they smiled in group photos and raised glasses under chandeliers, I was restoring the very house they claimed as theirs, brick by brick, with my own hands. And they never knew? They held a 100-year reunion, and my name wasn't even on the tree. But do you want to know what really happened when I showed up anyway? And they found out the house they were celebrating in was mine. Would you stay if you knew the lies didn't start this year, but decades ago? What do you do when the people who erased you expect you to thank them for the silence? The Charleston air always had a particular heaviness to it in spring, thick with humidity and magnolia petals that dropped like forgotten promises. I stepped off the bus alone, a canvas bag slung over my shoulder and a rental car reservation in my name that no one else seemed to know existed. No one waited at the curb. No phone call. No half-hearted welcome back. The driver didn't even ask if someone was meeting me. He just pulled my suitcase from the storage bay, set it on the cracked pavement, and left without a word. I stood there for a moment, trying not to let the emptiness creep in through the seams of my jacket. I adjusted the strap on my bag and walked across the lot, past a couple bickering about hotel directions, and into the rental car office. They handed me the keys like I was just another out-of-towner. I passed Whitley House on my way to the inn. I didn't slow down. The shutters had been repainted a glossy white, the lawn trimmed with cruel precision. From the outside, it looked like nothing had ever gone wrong there. I didn't trust it. The inn I booked was tucked behind a row of salt-stained homes, just far enough from the family compound to avoid running into anyone. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. The clerk gave me a key without asking for ID, just my confirmation number. That, somehow, felt worse. Upstairs, I placed my bag on the bed and sat down slowly, the way people do when they're not sure if the room will hold them. The walls were paper thin. I could hear the man next door coughing. I could hear my own breath. It was 4:43 p.m. when I opened the mailbox I still paid for. Dust coated the edges of every envelope. City tax notices, a real estate newsletter, 3 grocery coupons, and not a single word from my family. Not even a generic invite. Nothing with a crest, no email, no RSVP card. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Elise had posted a boomerang of the reunion group chat, the names of everyone invited, dozens of them. I zoomed in, scanned line by line. No Audra. No me. My hand stayed frozen above the screen longer than I'd like to admit. That night, I called Elias. My voice was even. I kept it short. Just got into town, I said. Thought I'd swing by sometime this week. Yeah, he said. And then there was static, followed by a pause. I didn't hang up. On the other end, I heard her. Corinne. My mother. That voice that once told bedtime stories like they were sacred scriptures. I hope she has the sense not to show her face, she said, her tone clipped. It's hard enough keeping this family respectable without having to explain her. There was a long pause. A glass clinked in the background. I won't lie for her again, Elias. I won't do it. The line clicked again. Sorry, bad signal, Elias said, coming back on. What were you saying? Nothing, I said. Just confirming I'll be around. I ended the call before I could hear anything else. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded my clothes methodically. I sorted the contents of my folder. Business licenses, deed copies, preservation contracts. My name was on every one of them. Then I slipped a name tag, one they'd never seen, into a cloth pouch. Audra Shipley, Preservation Consultant, National Trust. Let them keep their show. Let them preen and pose in the mirror of a legacy they didn't build. I wasn't there to fight for a seat at their table. I brought my own table now. At 10:12 p.m., I booked a private site visit at the reunion venue. Under an alias. Just a simple line of text. Anna Myers, Event Liaison. Followed by my actual phone number. The system accepted the booking without hesitation. That was the part that always stunned me. Systems never asked questions. People did. The morning sun hit the windshield as I pulled up to Whitley House's back service gate. I hadn't driven this route in years, but the turn still lived somewhere in my bones. I kept the visor down, partly for the glare, partly for the habit of staying unseen. I waited for a delivery van to finish unloading before sliding through, quiet as a shadow. The keypad blinked red until I punched in the 6 digits only I knew. The gate buzzed, then clicked open. I drove in like I belonged, because I did. I parked behind the maintenance wing and stepped out. A maintenance intern glanced up from hauling floral crates. I nodded, and he waved with the kind of friendliness reserved for vendors or crew. Perfect. Inside, the air was colder than I remembered. The floors, though, gleamed like they had something to prove. That shine had my signature beneath it. I stood in the foyer a moment longer than necessary, letting the hush settle. This was mine, my hands, my money, my scars behind every restored cornice. A young woman walked in briskly, holding a clipboard. She barely looked up. "You with catering or linens?" she asked, tapping her tablet. I met her eye. "Neither. I'm here for walk-through oversight." She pointed toward the East Hall without hesitation. "You'll need to check in with Marcy. She's coordinating the timeline." I nodded and moved forward. No one stopped me. No one questioned the name I gave on the form 2 days earlier. Anna Myers. I had sent it with a burner email. That was enough to get on the schedule. No one ever looked twice at logistics people. We're not supposed to matter. I walked the familiar path through the rear corridor, toward the ballroom that used to be our grandmother's solarium. They'd turned it into an event space, vaulted ceilings, mirrored sconces, and 3 chandeliers that cost more than my first condo. They called it the Whitley Grand. The irony didn't miss me. 2 months ago, a request for venue rental landed in my team's inbox. The name on the request? Shipley & Code Logistics, a holding arm Elias had started years ago. I'd known right away who it was. They wanted to rent Whitley House for a private family event. The paperwork arrived with no note, no mention of me. I approved it under my company's preservation trust, billed them the nonprofit rate, and never once corrected their assumption that the house belonged to someone else. They thought they were reclaiming legacy. They had no idea they were walking straight into mine. "Hey, ma'am?" I turned. A woman with blunt-cut blonde hair and a tight pencil skirt was squinting at me from across the ballroom. "Staff meals are in the back kitchen. We're running a little behind, so if you need to eat, I'd go now." "I'm good, thank you," I said calmly. "All right. But just so you know, we'll have to clear you out before guests arrive. Marcy doesn't want vendors in the way when the VIPs show." I gave her the kind of polite nod people mistake for obedience. She smiled, then turned to bark instructions at someone rearranging folding chairs. I walked to the stage setup. The arch they'd draped in ivory satin was my design, copied straight from a mock-up I created 4 years ago for a gala in Boston. They'd pulled it from my event portfolio without knowing the source. I laid my hand on the wood frame, smooth, steady, cold. "Probably just here to adjust flowers," someone whispered behind me. I let the words float. That's what they always thought, wasn't it? That I trimmed corners, that I ironed napkins, that I fluffed centerpieces but never signed checks, that I supported the weight of their pride without ever carrying a nameplate. "No," I murmured to myself. "I'm here to make history." I moved into the technical wing, down the stairs, and into the operations office. I logged into the event scheduler. My initials were in the footer of every form, subtle, small, embedded in corners where no one else would look. Catering confirmations, lighting cues, vendor tags, and at the bottom of the Friday night keynote plan, a locked folder. Phase 2, reveal, 7:45 p.m. No one had asked what it meant. No one had dared. Back upstairs, I stepped into the center of the ballroom. I looked up. The chandelier they installed with so much ceremony? I'd had it imported. Paid in full. They loved to brag about the house's historical status, but they never asked how it earned it, or Who had to fight tooth and nail to make sure this property wasn't bulldozed into parking lots? It was me. It had always been me. But tomorrow night, they would finally see it, etched across the screen they'd ordered to display their curated slideshow. I walked to the back wall, checked the positioning of the projector, then turned off the main lights. Before leaving, I slid the staging diagram into the folder marked Final. Let them show up in gowns and pearls. Let them raise their glasses in a house they believe still belongs to them. They won't even know they've walked into my blueprint until it's too late to rewrite the script. By the time I pulled open the heavy doors of the Charleston Cultural Hall, they'd already hung the banners and lined the hallway with catered buffet trays. The smell of pulled pork and citrus-drenched shrimp wafted through the air like perfume too strong for the space. Voices bounced off the high ceilings, polite laughter smoothed over with old jazz. Nobody noticed I was late, because nobody expected me to show up at all. I didn't wear black. I didn't hover near the exit. I walked in steady, with my chin just high enough to make a statement without starting a scene. The first face that turned my way blinked, then turned right back around, pretending I was another vendor looking for someone to sign off on the drinks order. To the right of the reception table stood what they were calling the legacy tree, a sculpted brass display stretched across a tall canvas, names engraved on gold leaves, arranged by generational branch. I stepped closer, more out of curiosity than pain. At least that's what I told myself. There were 4 leaves for my parents, 8 for my cousins, 5 for the new babies born since the last reunion. None for me. Jude, my sister's boy, wandered over with a paper plate full of fruit skewers. He was too young to understand the undertones in that room, but not too young to notice the absence of something obvious. "Aunt Audra," he said, chewing a piece of melon. "Where's your name?" I blinked slowly, then smiled. Maybe they ran out of space. He shrugged, unbothered, and drifted back to the dessert table. I stood there a minute longer, looking at that polished display. A piece of metal meant to honor a bloodline had found a way to remove mine entirely. I moved toward the back of the room, keeping a low profile. Small groups gathered in pockets, sipping drinks, passing phones to show old photos, nodding politely at updates about promotions or pregnancies. The kind of talk that fills a room when no one's willing to say what's really on their mind. "Don't let your kids play with Dylan," I heard someone say near the bar. I didn't turn, but I recognized the voice, one of my cousin's wives. The kind who wore heirloom pearls and still used words like appropriate and well-bred, without irony. "He's from her side," another replied. "That branch doesn't follow tradition." I scanned the room for Dylan. He was at the far end, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. He caught me looking. I gave him a small nod. That night, as we lay on the stiff pullout in our motel room, he asked me softly, "Are we not really family, Mom?" I couldn't lie. I wouldn't. "We're just not the kind of family they want to show off," I said. "That doesn't make us less." He stared at the ceiling a moment, then whispered, "I'm okay not being like them." I bit my cheek, nodded, and reached over to flick off the lamp. The next day at the mixer, a folded newspaper sat on one of the tables. Its front page featured a glossy write-up of the Whitley House renovation, part of a local series on Charleston's historic properties. The headline praised the preservation effort, calling it a heartfelt revival led by local legacy bearer Eliza Shipley. Eliza, my sister, the one who hadn't stepped foot on the property until a year after I'd signed the deed. The one who once told me restoring an old building was a waste of talent. I kept my expression flat as Elias stood up and clinked his glass. "I just want to say," he began, "this family wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Eliza's vision and persistence. She's the reason Whitley House is still standing." People clapped, some cheered. Eliza gave a modest wave, the kind polished women give when they're used to being clapped for. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because in my purse was the permit, signed months before Eliza even knew the house was up for sale. because I had the inspection reports, the restoration contracts, the city approvals, all in my name. But mostly because the wall behind them? I chose that paint. The floor beneath their feet? I picked that finish. That applause. They could keep it. Later that evening, back at the motel, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the website for the Charleston Daily. I hovered over the Submit Correction button, fingers poised. I started to type, "To whom it may concern, the attribution in your recent article regarding..." Then I stopped. I deleted the words, closed the tab, and whispered to no one in particular, "I won't need to correct the past. I'll own the moment." And the moment was coming. The next evening, I slipped into the cultural hall through the side entrance, 15 minutes before the family film screening was set to start. I told Dylan to hang back in the motel for the night. There was no reason for him to see any more than he already had. Some bruises didn't need repetition. Inside, the lights had been dimmed to a moody amber, flickering softly across the tall windows. Rows of cushioned chairs lined the center aisle. Folded programs rested neatly on each seat, printed with the title, "100 Years of Whitley, A Family Worth Remembering." I walked past them without picking one up. Corinne sat in the second row, her posture as tight as a drawn bow. Elias leaned in to whisper something, and she nodded, her mouth in that sharp line she wore when she didn't want to be asked anything. I kept walking until I found a seat near the back, close enough to observe, far enough not to be noticed. The screen flickered to life, and the first images bloomed in soft grays and muted blues. Children in Sunday clothes running through the orchard. My grandfather building the porch railings. A group photo from 1964, smiling faces in front of Whitley House before the hurricanes wore the shutters down. Then there was me. Just once. I appeared in a birthday clip, maybe 6 seconds long, 7 tops. I was 5 or 6, wearing a paper crown, sitting on the front steps, holding a cupcake. The next frame cut to Eliza playing piano at a school recital, then Gregory's graduation, then wedding shots, then more babies. My face never reappeared. It wasn't that they cut me out, they just skipped me. I didn't blink, I didn't shift in my seat, but every breath got a little heavier as the footage kept rolling. At one point, a woman behind me whispered, "Wasn't there another daughter?" "Estranged," came the answer. "Moved away, didn't keep in touch." I clenched my fists under the program I never opened. Months earlier, I'd submitted a formal request to be reinstated on the Shipley Heritage Committee. Just a simple email, signed and dated. I offered to provide archival documents. I offered to fund restoration projects. I got no response. Not even a line of acknowledgement. After the video ended, Elias passed me near the back exit, eyes flicking once in my direction. "They didn't think you were active enough," he said, voice low, like it would matter if anyone overheard. "Is that what they told you?" I asked. He didn't answer. We stood in silence until the hallway cleared. "I've restored 7 registered properties," I added. "Built a nonprofit from scratch. Paid to save the house they're clinking glasses in tomorrow. But sure, let's call me inactive." I didn't wait for him to respond. Back inside, the chatter rose again. Less about the film and more about the dinner menu. As I walked past the drink station, a cousin I barely recognized tugged at my elbow. "Just between us," she whispered. "You being here is making people nervous." I gave her a blank stare. "Some folks think you're here to stir things up, that maybe you're trying to hijack Eliza's big moment." "Is that what Eliza thinks?" She tilted her head. "I'm just repeating what I heard." I kept my voice even. "Tell them to relax. I didn't come to take anything. I came to confirm what's mine." She blinked, lips parting slightly, and I walked away before she could fill the space with another warning disguised as concern. The AV team had finished setting up for the next event, and I wandered toward the corner they'd marked as restricted. I made sure my name badge was flipped backward and approached the main console. "Need help?" one of the techs asked, friendly but firm. "I'm good," I said. Just checking connection stability. Our nonprofit is considering a partnership. He nodded and moved on. That night, back in my room, I opened the event file on my laptop. The screen glowed blue against the dark motel wall. I scrolled down to the Friday night schedule and inserted a timed override for 7:45 p.m. 15 seconds only, just enough to get their attention. The file title was simple: Intro sought from ownership. I didn't add my name. I didn't need to. I sealed the final folder, double encrypted the backups, and turned off the screen. The plan wasn't complicated. It was just quiet. She didn't even flinch when they laughed at me across the table. But she'll flinch tomorrow. Friday evening settled over Whitley House like a silk sheet, smooth on the surface, suffocating underneath. Cars lined the drive. Every last porch light was on. The smell of catered rosemary chicken drifted out from the back terrace. I arrived before the sun dipped too far, wanting enough daylight to see the details I knew they'd try to claim. The foyer was bustling. Servers clipped name tags onto trays of champagne. A string quartet tuned in the corner. People laughed a little too loudly, talked a little too fast, like they were trying to convince each other they belonged there. I kept to the west wing while they gathered. This part of the house wasn't open to guests, not officially. The gallery hallway still held family portraits, our ancestors painted in stiff oil, their gazes always just above eye level. But the plaque at the far end was new. Bronze, polished, bolted clean into the wall. Shipley Trust, Historical Stewardship Program administered by Elias Shipley. I blinked. 10 years earlier, my father promised me stewardship of Whitley House, not in some dramatic proclamation, just him, me, and a mug of strong coffee at the breakfast table after church. "You're the one who gives a damn about the bones of this place," he'd said. "You'll keep it alive." But now his name was gone. Mine too. Replaced with my brother's, Elias, who once told me the only thing old houses were good for was termite training grounds. I smiled. Just slightly. Because they might have swapped names on a plaque, but the title deed? That was filed in my name with the Charleston County Registrar. I stepped away from the wall and headed toward the ballroom, where final adjustments were underway. That's when I heard it. "Is she part of catering?" a woman asked, not bothering to lower her voice. "I thought I saw her wiping down chairs earlier." Another chimed in. "She's probably just helping with setup. If she wanted to be seen, she'd have done something with her life by now." I stopped just before the archway. My hands didn't shake. I turned slowly, scanning the crowd until I found them. Two great aunts, both dressed like they were heading to a garden club gala. One sipped from her flute like it was a microphone. The other had the same brittle smile she wore at my high school graduation, when she whispered to Corinne, "At least your other daughter finished college." I lifted my glass and toasted toward no one in particular. They didn't see it, but I did. I moved to the far end of the room, where the seating chart sat on an easel. Someone had printed it in gold script, with decorative borders and assigned table names like Heritage, Tradition, and Pillar. I found my name at a table labeled Legacy Support, 2 seats down from the florist. I didn't change it. I just stood there long enough for Elias to notice. He wandered over, drink in hand, eyes narrowing with that familiar discomfort of someone who knew they were out of their depth. "Something wrong with the list?" he asked, like he hadn't seen it before. "No," I said. "I just like seeing where people think I belong." He shifted. "Look, Eliza handled most of the logistics. I didn't review the final seating." "Of course not," I said quietly. "Why would you?" He took a sip of bourbon. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. "By the way," I added, "do you know whose signature was on the rental contract for this venue?" He paused. "No?" "Then I suggest you keep your eyes on the slideshow tonight." His brows pulled in, confused, but I didn't stay long enough for him to ask questions. By 7:15, the ballroom was glowing. Candles flickered on every table. Guests posed beneath the house crest, snapped photos with monogrammed goblets in hand. I stood under the chandelier they once told me I'd never see lit from the inside. That light? I chose the bulbs. Warmth over wattage. Noah, the AV lead, gave me a nod from the back corner. The trigger file was in place. 15 seconds. One title card. That's all it would take. I slipped my phone into my clutch, turned toward the crowd, and whispered under my breath, "Let them watch their history unfold, through mine." Saturday afternoon crept in quietly, the kind of stillness that makes every noise feel amplified. By 3 o'clock, the final vendor vans had cleared the circular drive, and most of the family was either napping off the wine from the night before or getting their hair done for the big evening ahead. I stayed behind while the others headed into town for last-minute errands and dry cleaning pickups. My moment didn't need makeup. I made my way to the East Wing, the part of Whitley House they turned into an exhibit space after the restoration. The walls held curated Whitley family moments, as the plaque said, rows of framed photographs, newspaper articles, a few artifacts under plexiglass. The touchscreen directory near the entrance welcomed guests to explore your lineage. I tapped in my name. Nothing came up. I tried again, slower. The screen hesitated, then displayed Audra Shipley, former student, left Charleston in her 20s. No record of return. No mention of the degrees. The land registry. The preservation awards. The national grant I'd secured to keep this building from foreclosure. I tapped the corner of the screen harder, but it didn't change. It sat there, unmoved, like the lie had been laminated into the history. Down the hall, a volunteer smiled politely as she rearranged some brochures. "They just added a whole new wing," she said casually, gesturing toward a door labeled Founder's Room. I waited until she turned to greet a group of early arriving cousins before I approached. The doorknob was locked. Of course! I flagged down a staff member who looked about 19 with a walkie clipped to his belt. "I'm here doing archival verification," I said evenly. "Can you open this?" He didn't ask for ID, just pulled out a ring of keys and popped it open. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint. The display cases were lined with soft lighting and silk backing. On the right, portraits of my grandfather, letters he wrote to the city council about zoning ordinances, a dusty blue Boy Scout sash, his war medals, my father's wedding ring in a glass dome. On the left? Gone. There used to be a corner display of my architectural renderings, an article from Preservation Monthly, the signed deed transfer dated 8 years ago. All of it removed. In its place, Eliza's wedding photos, a lace veil draped artfully over a velvet pillow. A caption reading, "A Modern Legacy Continues." I didn't touch anything, didn't speak, but in that silence, I made a promise. By the time I stepped back into the main ballroom, the room was in full swing, florists doing final tweaks, table cards being adjusted, waiters checking silverware placement. I climbed the west stairwell slowly, one hand trailing the railing I'd personally approved to restore. At the top, I paused near the overlook that gave me a view of everything below. Noah was behind the tech table, organizing slides and nodding to a junior assistant. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave a single, short nod. It was all in place. I turned toward the far end of the overlook, where a framed photo of my father had been mounted just for tonight. They'd set up a table with hydrangeas, his favorite, apparently. I adjusted the frame by a 1/4 inch. Enough to matter. Enough to say I was here. "I didn't ask for a crown," I whispered. "Just a seat." The doors opened below, and Corinne walked in. Hair done up, pearls gleaming, her posture like a column of pride. She noticed me immediately, didn't smile, just walked over with the gait of someone who'd long since forgotten what it meant to greet their own child first. "Please behave tonight," she said flatly. No emotion, just instruction. I turned slowly, keeping my voice measured. "I always do." There was a pause. "It's the record," I added, "that hasn't behaved." Her face didn't twitch, but her eyes narrowed just enough to register the weight of what I'd said. She didn't ask questions, didn't make excuses. She just smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her sleeve and turned to leave. I watched her disappear into the hallway with that same practiced indifference she used when strangers asked if she had 2 daughters or just one. I walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down at the room filling with people. Some would smile at me tonight without knowing why. Some wouldn't look at all. Didn't matter. They clinked glasses and smiled wide, unaware they were standing on the stage I built. The lights dimmed right on cue, and I slipped quietly behind the row of ferns flanking the ballroom's western wall. The noise dulled into that anticipatory hush. Forks lowered, shoulders straightened, whispers stopped mid-sentence. They thought it was time for the slideshow, and it was. Eliza stood at the center of the room, framed by candlelight and pride. Her red dress shimmered under the chandelier I'd approved to rewire 2 years ago. She gave a little wave, modest, rehearsed, and cleared her throat as the first few images flickered onto the massive LED screen behind her. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice warm and hollow. "It's been a privilege helping bring our family home back to its rightful glory." Rightful. That word hung in the air, heavier than any toast. She went on about honor, legacy, and the hands that shaped us. Her eyes drifted once toward Corinne, who nodded as if she were receiving an award. I waited, not with impatience, just certainty. Then came the flicker. The screen jolted, paused mid-transition. A collective breath hitched. The slide that followed wasn't part of the cue they'd previewed. White text appeared over a matte black background, centered, clean. Whitley House, restored and owned by Audra Shipley gasps, rose like a wave across the ballroom. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Eliza's mouth parted, but no sound followed. Then came the photo. Me, standing in front of the property with the deed in hand, sleeves rolled up, dirt on my boots, sun behind my shoulder. The real image, no edit, no filter. Eliza turned slowly, still facing the crowd, but watching the screen from the corner of her eye. Her voice cracked, barely audible. I didn't approve this, but no one was looking at her anymore. Corinne sat motionless, lips drawn so tight her face looked carved from stone. A vein pulsed just below her ear, and for the first time that night, she wasn't controlling the narrative. Noah turned off the projector, as instructed. The screen returned to black. The entire interruption lasted 15 seconds, exactly what I'd planned. A pause followed. Dead air, uncomfortable and perfect. And then, from the back of the room, a voice called out. That house was saved because of her. Heads turned. Ms. Etta, one of the church elders, stepped forward. She leaned on her cane, shoes polished and dressed simple, but her presence filled the space like scripture. We wouldn't have our choir hall if she hadn't stepped in, she continued. Don't rewrite history when the ink's still wet. Her eyes met mine across the room. I nodded. Just once. I didn't need applause. I didn't want it. The silence was louder. Elias approached me near the stairwell, where I'd returned after the override. You could have told us, he said. His tone wasn't accusing, just small, smaller than I'd ever heard it. You already told me who I was, I replied. I just stopped believing you. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For once, he didn't defend, didn't explain. He simply moved aside, clearing my path. I crossed the room, slow and measured, heels echoing on the tile. Corinne hadn't moved. Her hands rested in her lap, perfectly still, but her jaw was tight. I stopped beside her, not out of drama, but closure. You planned all of this, she said, not looking up. No, I replied. You did. When you chose your silence over my story. That landed harder than anything I could have shouted. I turned before she could recover, stepping away just as the first hesitant clap began. It came from someone I didn't recognize. then another, then more. But I didn't stay for the ovation. I didn't need their approval wrapped in retroactive grace. I stepped up toward the stage, not to speak, not to pose, but to exist. Fully. Without their version of me muting my presence. They clapped because they had nothing else left to say. And for the first time, the weight left my shoulders quietly, not because I was accepted, but because I no longer needed to be. After the slideshow ended and the clapping faded, I slipped out before anyone had the chance to find their courage. The ballroom lights buzzed back to full, the champagne resumed its pour, and the conversation limped back to safe topics: weather, business, where someone's kid got into college. But I was already in the hallway, heels muffled by the carpet, breath steady. In a side room behind the stage, I found a chair and sat, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the moment to land fully before it disappeared. That was the thing about justice. It rarely announced itself like thunder. Sometimes it arrived in 15 seconds of text on a screen. Elias came in 5 minutes later, alone. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, fiddling with the edge of a folded piece of paper like it had weight he wasn't used to holding. "I found this in Dad's file," he said, handing it to me without ceremony. "Meant to give it to you earlier." I took the paper gently. It was old, creased twice, the edges soft, like something read more than once. It read, "If she ever takes the house, I hope she remembers why she cared in the first place. It wasn't the walls. It was the people who used to fill them." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting, and I knew what it cost him to write that, especially living in a house ruled by silence. Elias shifted. He knew. He just couldn't say it with her around. I nodded once. I didn't thank him. I didn't need to. We both understood. Later, I made one last pass through the ballroom after the guests had cleared out. The space looked stripped of intention again, like a shell after the tide retreats. Wrappers near the bar, a napkin left folded perfectly in a chair, as if someone still thought they might return to it. I walked across the room slowly. Every footstep on the herringbone floor I'd saved from demolition echoed with memory. I stopped beneath the same chandelier I'd stood under the night before. The light was dimmer now, just the evening fixtures on. I adjusted the portrait of my grandfather by 2 degrees. I wasn't sure anyone else would notice, but I would. Then I reached the panel near the switchboard and turned off the lights. The whole room went still. No fanfare. Just quiet. Outside, the breeze carried the smell of gardenia and the sound of the city pulsing gently in the distance. Near the back garden, I spotted Corinne, standing near the boxwoods. Her back was to me, but when I approached, she turned without surprise. "You got what you wanted," she said, voice clipped and without inflection. "I didn't come for anything," I replied. "I came to keep what was mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You embarrassed your family." "No," I said softly. "I corrected a story you kept rewriting." She opened her mouth, maybe to offer something. Justification, denial, or worse, another instruction. But I turned before she could decide. Some silences are stronger than comebacks. I didn't hear her footsteps behind me. Noah met me near the front corridor. I handed him the spare key set to the private office and the schedule file for future events. "You're not keeping the place?" he asked. "Oh, it's still mine," I said, "but I've seen enough of it for now." I stepped outside into the soft dark of evening. Dylan was waiting in the car, a paper bag of leftover cookies in his lap and a comic book resting on his knees. He looked up. "Are we going back to Asheville now?" I slid into the driver's seat and fastened my belt. "No," I said. "We're going forward." As we pulled away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The house was framed in the glow of porch lights. It looked proud, but not smug. And for the first time, it didn't feel like it was trying to keep me out. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. By Sunday afternoon, the roads between Charleston and Asheville had become more familiar than they should have been. The kind of familiar you don't brag about, just the quiet knowing of how each curve rises before it comes. We'd arrived home just past noon. Dylan dropped his comic book on the hallway table, toed off his shoes, and flopped onto the couch like the world owed him a break for riding in silence for 4 hours. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Some silences are earned. Upstairs, I unpacked my suitcase slowly. Nothing in it was especially meaningful. A pair of earrings I didn't wear, a blouse that still smelled faintly of Whitley House, and the folder I hadn't opened since Friday night. I placed it in the back of my closet, on the shelf with the childhood journals and the lockbox of family recipes. Maybe one day I'd toss it. Maybe not. I heard footsteps behind me. Dylan stood at the doorway, holding something I hadn't seen in years. A scrapbook, the green leather-bound one I used to keep under my bed before we moved. He opened to a page and pointed. "These pictures? That's the old house, right? Before the fix-ups?" I nodded, sitting beside him. "You really did all that?" "Some of it," I said. "Enough of it." He flipped another page. The edges were frayed, the glue barely holding. There were photos of the demolition permits, grainy images of rot under the beams. The day I signed the restoration contract, I didn't realize how much of it I'd documented. Maybe part of me always knew I'd need proof, even if only for myself. The next morning, I opened my laptop and checked email. There was one message from Elias. Subject: Property Trust. Message: There are questions from the board about the rental and ownership split. I didn't say anything. Thought it best you handle it. No apology, no small talk, just acknowledgement. Which, in our family, was practically a handwritten confession. I didn't reply. I archived the email and closed the laptop. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's closure. Later that day, a friend from Charleston sent me a link to a local blog that had reposted an excerpt from the reunion slideshow. The headline read, "The Woman Who Bought Her Family's Legacy." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "Well, that's bold. About time someone flipped the script. Families can be the cruelest mirrors." I read them all. I didn't click like. I didn't reply. Just read. There was one comment that stuck with me. She didn't take it back. She just stopped asking for permission. And I thought, yes, that. That night, after dinner, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and a pen I'd stolen from Whitley House when I was 16. Back when I still thought stealing meant you were taking something that didn't belong to you. I wrote, "Mom, I don't need you to change. I'm not even asking you to understand. I just want you to know I never needed your approval. I just wanted to not be erased." I stared at the paper for a while. The ink didn't smudge. The words didn't waver. Then I folded the letter neatly, carried it downstairs, and dropped it into the fireplace. It caught quickly, burned clean. Dylan and I went for a walk later, up the gravel trail that curled behind our neighborhood. It was lined with wildflowers this time of year. Daisies, coneflowers, a few scattered Queen Anne's lace. The kind of path no one trims, but still stays beautiful. He picked a stem and spun it between his fingers. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. I thought about it, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. "Not better," I said. "Just honest." He nodded, satisfied, then ran ahead, the flower still in hand. I let him lead. I'd spent too long chasing things that never waited for me. There was no curtain call, just silence. And finally, it didn't feel cruel.